"Can I sleep here tonight?" asked the lost dragon hatchling to the lonely human janitor. Then, before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The night shift at Nexus Station was the loneliest job in the galaxy. Ethan Cole knew this better than anyone as he pushed his hover mop down the empty corridor of the massive space station, the soft hum of the cleaning device the only sound in the cavernous silence. Nexus Station sat at the crossroads of 7 different alien civilizations, a neutral ground for diplomacy and trade. During the day cycle, it bustled with activity, delegates rushing to meetings, merchants hawking exotic goods, tourists gawking at the diversity of sentient life. But at night, when most species retreated to their quarters or returned to their ships, the corridors belonged to Ethan and his cleaning equipment. 5 years had passed since he'd taken this job, fleeing Earth and a broken heart, seeking solitude among the stars. The pay was decent, the quarters adequate, and most importantly, no one bothered him. The various alien diplomats barely acknowledged his existence as he moved silently through their world, erasing the evidence of their presence. Discarded food wrappers, spilled drinks, shed scales, and the occasional diplomatic document marked "destroy" after reading that he dutifully fed into the incinerator. Tonight was the 3rd anniversary of his arrival at the station. Not that anyone remembered or cared. Ethan had just finished sanitizing the food court when a strange sound echoed down the corridor. A soft, trilling chirp followed by what sounded like tiny claws skittering across metal. Ethan paused, leaning on his mop. The station had strict protocols about biological containment. An unidentified creature loose in the common areas was a serious breach that should be reported immediately. He sighed, reaching for his communicator, then hesitated. Whatever it was sounded small. Probably some diplomat's pet that had escaped. If he reported it officially, the station's security would lock down the entire level, disrupting tomorrow's negotiations between the Vexel Confederacy and the Solarian Republic, talks that had taken years to arrange. "I'll just catch it myself," he muttered, setting aside his mop and pulling a nutrient bar from his pocket. He broke off a piece, then followed the sound of skittering claws down the corridor. The noise led him to the grand atrium, a massive domed space where plant life from dozens of worlds grew in careful harmony. During the day, it served as a neutral meeting ground for informal discussions. Now, in the dim night cycle lighting, the exotic foliage cast strange shadows across the floor. "Hello," Ethan called softly, holding out the piece of nutrient bar. "I'm not going to hurt you. Come on out." For a moment, there was silence. Then the shadows near a twisted, blue-leaf tree shifted, and a pair of luminous eyes blinked at him. Large, faceted eyes that glowed with an inner light, like opals catching the sun. The creature emerged hesitantly. It was about the size of a house cat, with a sinuous, scaled body balanced on 4 clawed feet. 2 small wings, too small for flight, hugged its sides, and a ridge of delicate spines ran down its back to the tip of its tail. Its scales shimmered with iridescence, shifting from deep blue to purple as it moved. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Even with his limited xenobiology knowledge, he recognized what he was seeing. A Draconis stellaris hatchling, what humans had dubbed stellar dragons. The rarest, most revered species in known space. Stellar dragons were sentient, ancient beings that could grow to the size of small shuttlecraft. They were natural spacefarers, able to survive in vacuum and propel themselves between stars using their evolved bioelectric fields. They were revered across the galaxy as wise counselors and impartial mediators. Their home world was a closely guarded secret, and they seldom ventured into civilized space except for matters of grave importance. And here was a baby one, looking at him with those luminous eyes, its head tilted in curiosity. "Hello, little one," Ethan said softly, kneeling and extending his hand with the nutrient bar. "Are you lost?" The hatchling chirped, a musical sound that somehow conveyed both distress and hope. It took a cautious step forward, then another, its claws clicking against the polished floor. When it reached Ethan's outstretched hand, It sniffed at the nutrient bar, then looked up at him with those impossible eyes. "Can I sleep here tonight?" The words appeared in Ethan's mind, not as sound but as a clear, childlike thought, tinged with fear and exhaustion. Ethan almost fell backwards in surprise. He'd heard the stellar dragons were telepathic, but experiencing it firsthand was shocking. The hatchling seemed to sense his alarm and backed away, wings quivering. Sorry, Ethan whispered, regaining his composure. "You just surprised me." "Yes, of course you can sleep somewhere safe." His mind raced. Protocol dictated he should report this immediately to station security, who would contact the Stellar Dragon Liaison Office. But something in those opalescent eyes made him hesitate. "Are you alone? Where are your parents?" Ethan asked, unsure of the proper terminology for dragon guardians. The hatchling's eyes dimmed slightly. "Lost. Separated during the stellar current shift. Tried to follow, but too weak." The thoughts carried emotional undertones of fear and exhaustion that made Ethan's heart clench. "How did you get on the station?" "Followed the bright lights. Found an opening. So tired." The hatchling swayed slightly, and Ethan realized it was exhausted. He made a decision then, one that probably violated a dozen station protocols. "Come with me," he said, standing slowly. "I'll find you somewhere safe to rest." The hatchling chirped again and, to Ethan's surprise, scurried forward and climbed up his leg, settling itself across his shoulders like a scarf. Its weight was substantial but not uncomfortable, and its scales were warm against his neck. "Okay then," Ethan murmured, trying to act as though having a baby stellar dragon draped around his neck was a perfectly normal occurrence. "Let's get you somewhere quiet." He retrieved his cleaning equipment and continued his rounds, the hatchling a warm presence around his shoulders. Its breathing gradually slowed, and he realized it had fallen asleep, tiny puffs of what looked like stardust occasionally escaping its nostrils. Ethan's quarters were small but private, a perk of his position as head night janitor. He entered carefully, trying not to disturb his sleeping passenger, and locked the door behind him. "Home sweet home," he whispered, looking around at his sparse accommodations: a bed, a small kitchenette, a desk with a terminal, and a tiny bathroom. The walls were decorated with a few photos of Earth and a star chart of the local sector. The hatchling stirred, lifting its head and blinking sleepily around the room. Its gaze settled on Ethan's bed, and he felt the gentle pressure of its thoughts again. "Safe here. Thank you, kind human." "You're welcome," Ethan replied, carefully lifting the creature from his shoulders and setting it on his bed. "You can sleep there. I'll take the floor." The hatchling chirped in what seemed like protest, then curled into a tight spiral in the center of the bed, its tail wrapped around its body. Within moments, it was asleep again, the soft glow of its scales providing a gentle nightlight. Ethan stood watching the sleeping dragon, reality slowly sinking in. He had a baby stellar dragon, one of the most revered and protected species in the galaxy, sleeping in his bed. He should report this immediately. The diplomatic ramifications alone were staggering. Instead, he found himself pulling a spare blanket from his closet and making a pallet on the floor. The hatchling clearly needed rest. He'd figure out what to do in the morning. Sleep was elusive that night. Ethan lay awake, watching the gentle rise and fall of the hatchling's sides, the soft pulsing glow of its scales. Questions tumbled through his mind. How had it become separated from its kind? How long had it been alone? What did baby dragons eat? And most pressingly, what would happen when he reported its presence to the authorities? Stellar dragons were fiercely protected by interstellar law. The penalties for harming one were severe, but they were also intensely private beings. Finding a hatchling alone was unprecedented. Would they blame him somehow? Would this trigger some diplomatic incident? He must have eventually drifted off, because he woke to something warm and heavy on his chest. Opening his eyes, he found himself staring directly into the luminous gaze of the hatchling, which had apparently abandoned the bed to curl up on top of him. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice rough with sleep. "Hungry," came the immediate thought response, accompanied by a sensation of gnawing emptiness that made Ethan's own stomach growl in sympathy. "Right food." Ethan carefully shifted the hatchling off his chest and sat up. What do you eat? The answer came as a series of images rather than words, streaking lights that he recognized as small comets, floating chunks of what looked like crystalline asteroids, and strange, glowing motes that might have been some kind of spaceborne microorganism. I don't have any of that, Ethan said apologetically. But let me see what I can find. His refrigeration unit contained his usual provisions: nutrient bars, synthetic protein packs, and a few luxury items he'd splurged on during his last leave. He selected a protein pack and a container of real honey, an expensive treat he'd been saving for a special occasion. The hatchling sniffed at both offerings, then delicately lapped at the honey, its forked tongue flicking in and out with surprising speed. The container was empty within minutes, and the hatchling looked up expectantly. That's all the honey I have, Ethan said. Try the protein. The hatchling nudged the synthetic protein pack with its snout, then looked at Ethan with what he could only interpret as disgust. Yeah, I don't like it much either, he admitted. Look, I need to report that you're here. The station has protocols for. No. The thought shout was so intense it made Ethan wince. Not safe. What do you mean, not safe? This is Nexus Station. It's neutral territory. There are laws protecting your kind throughout civilized space. The hatchling's distress manifested as a chaotic jumble of images and emotions: danger, pursuit, hiding, fear. Ethan couldn't make sense of the specifics, but the message was clear. The hatchling believed reporting its presence would put it in danger. Okay, Ethan said, raising his hands placatingly. No reporting for now, but I need to understand what's happening. Why isn't it safe? The hatchling's communication became more focused, showing Ethan an image of a ship, sleek, black, with unusual protrusions that might have been weapons or sensors. Then came images of adult stellar dragons fleeing, of pursuit through the void, of energy weapons firing. Someone's hunting stellar dragons. Ethan asked, horrified. That's illegal everywhere. Who would dare? The hatchling couldn't provide a name, only impressions of shadowy figures and malevolent intent. But one detail came through clearly. The hunters wore insignias that Ethan recognized with a chill. They were members of the Vexel Confederacy's military elite, the very delegation currently engaged in peace talks on the station. Oh, Ethan said, sitting heavily on his bed. That complicates things. His shift would begin again in 8 hours. Until then, he had a hungry dragon hatchling to feed and a potential interstellar incident to consider. If the hatchling's impressions were accurate, members of the Vexel delegation were secretly hunting stellar dragons, a crime that would spark immediate sanctions and possibly war if discovered. But why? Stellar dragons were revered, yes, but they weren't known to possess any resource or technology that would make them targets. Unless there was something about them that wasn't common knowledge. Why are they hunting your kind? Ethan asked directly. The hatchling's response came as a series of disjointed images: adult dragons gathering in space, a strange, swirling energy pattern between them, and then something Ethan couldn't quite comprehend: a sense of reality bending, of possibilities branching and converging. I don't understand, he admitted. The hatchling seemed frustrated, then projected a simpler concept: future seeing. Ethan's eyes widened. Precognition? Your species can see the future. The confirmation came with a qualification: not exact futures, but probabilities, patterns, the flow of time's river and its likely courses. It was an ability that manifested fully only in mature dragons, and only when they worked together in specific formations. And the Vexel want to use this ability, Ethan guessed, or prevent others from using it. The hatchling conveyed agreement, along with a deep weariness that made Ethan's heart ache. It had been fleeing for days, surviving on whatever space debris it could find, its immature navigation sense barely allowing it to stay on course. You need more than honey, Ethan decided. Wait here. He dressed quickly in his uniform, the gray jumpsuit marking him as station maintenance staff, invisible to most of the station's important occupants. Before leaving, he created a nest of blankets in the corner of his room, which the hatchling immediately claimed, burrowing into the soft folds until only its luminous eyes were visible. "I'll be back soon," Ethan promised. "Stay hidden." The station was beginning its day cycle as Ethan made his way to the hydroponics level. He had legitimate business there. Checking the sanitation systems for the food-producing sections was part of his regular duties. But today, he had an additional agenda. The hydroponics bays were a marvel of bioengineering, growing plants from dozens of worlds in carefully controlled environments. Ethan made his way to Bay 7, which specialized in mineral-rich crystalline vegetation from the Andromeda sector, plants that grew by absorbing and restructuring metals and minerals rather than organic matter. "Morning," Ethan called Olivia Hayes, the hydroponics specialist on duty. "Early for your inspection, aren't you?" "Just trying to get ahead," Ethan replied with what he hoped was a casual smile. "The diplomatic reception tonight means double sanitizing in the public areas." Olivia nodded sympathetically. "Those Vexel delegates are something else. The mineral consumption reports from their quarters are off the charts. Had to reroute 3 shipments just to keep up with their dietary requirements." This caught Ethan's attention. "The Vexel eat minerals?" "Process them, technically. Their biochemistry is silicate-based rather than carbon. They extract energy from crystal structures." Olivia gestured to a section of glittering, faceted plants. "These supplies are specifically for them. High energy density." Ethan looked at the crystalline growths with new interest. If the hatchling had shown him images of eating crystalline asteroids, perhaps these would serve as a substitute. "Fascinating," he said, trying to sound merely curious. "Any chance I could get a sample?" "For, my collection." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You collect xenobotanical specimens?" "New hobby," Ethan said weakly. "Trying to learn more about the species we host." To his relief, Olivia seemed more amused than suspicious. "Sure, why not? These need harvesting anyway." She selected a cluster of crystal formations, each about the size of Ethan's thumb, and placed them in a small container. "Just don't try eating them yourself. Human digestive systems can't process these structures." "Wouldn't dream of it," Ethan assured her, pocketing the container. "Thanks, Olivia." He completed his inspection quickly, then made one more stop at the commissary, where he used his monthly luxury ration points to purchase 2 more jars of real honey. It depleted his allocation entirely, but the memory of the hatchling's enthusiastic response to the sweet substance made the sacrifice worthwhile. When Ethan returned to his quarters, he found the blanket nest empty. For a moment, panic gripped him. Had the hatchling left? Been discovered? Then he noticed the slight depression in his mattress and the subtle shimmering in the air above it. "Are you invisible?" he asked the apparently empty room. The air wavered, and suddenly the hatchling was visible again, looking rather pleased with itself. "Camouflage," came the explanatory thought. "Not invisible. Bend light." "That's incredibly useful," Ethan admitted, impressed. He set down his purchases on the small table. "I brought you some things to eat." The hatchling approached cautiously, sniffing at the container of crystalline growths. After a moment's hesitation, it delicately picked up one of the crystal clusters and crunched it between specialized teeth. Its eyes widened, then half-closed in what Ethan interpreted as pleasure. "Good," he asked. The hatchling conveyed enthusiastic appreciation, quickly devouring the entire container of crystals. Afterward, it lapped at one of the honey jars as a sort of dessert, then curled contentedly on Ethan's bed, its scales glowing a satisfied blue. "We need to figure out what to do," Ethan said, sitting beside the hatchling. "I can't keep you hidden in my quarters forever. Sooner or later, someone will notice." The hatchling's response was surprisingly clear. "Find my people. They search for me." "How?" "Space is vast, and I'm just a janitor. I don't have access to long-range communications or sensors." The hatchling projected an image of itself glowing brighter, pulsing with energy in a specific pattern, some kind of signal. Then it projected the limitations. Such a signal would require more energy than it currently possessed, and would be detectable not just by its own kind, but by the hunters as well. "So you need more energy," Ethan mused, "and a safe place to send this signal from." He thought about the station's layout. about the areas he had access to. As head night janitor, his keycard could open most maintenance areas, including some that housed substantial power systems. But accessing those systems, redirecting energy that would set off alarms, bring security running. Unless the diplomatic reception tonight, Ethan said slowly. It's being held in the Grand Hall. They're bringing in special lighting arrays, acoustic modifiers, atmospheric adjusters, all high-energy systems. The hatchling perked up, sensing his train of thought. If you could get into the equipment room during the reception, tap into that power while all systems are running at maximum. Would that be enough? The hatchling considered this, then conveyed cautious optimism. It might work, but the timing would need to be precise, and they would have only one chance before the power surge was detected. Leave the access to me, Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. But we'll need to move quickly, and you'll need to stay hidden until we reach the equipment room. The plan was risky, borderline reckless. If caught, Ethan would lose his job at minimum, face criminal charges at worst. But as he looked at the hatchling, this rare, wondrous being that had trusted him with its safety, he knew he had no choice. For the first time in years, something mattered more than his solitary routine. The hours until the reception passed in tense preparation. Ethan reviewed station schematics, planned their route and timing. The hatchling rested, conserving energy, occasionally practicing its camouflage ability until it could maintain the light-bending effect for extended periods. As his shift approached, Ethan faced a dilemma: how to transport the hatchling through the station without detection. Its camouflage was impressive but not perfect. A keen observer might notice the subtle distortion, especially in motion. The solution came from an unexpected source. Among Ethan's cleaning supplies was an atmospheric purifier, a cylindrical device about the size of a small duffel bag, used for extracting airborne contaminants in sensitive areas. Its interior was spacious enough to hold the hatchling, and its design included ventilation ports that would allow the creature to breathe. It's not the most dignified transportation, Ethan told the hatchling as he presented the modified purifier, but it should get you through the station safely. The hatchling inspected the device with clear skepticism, poking its snout into the ventilation ports and circling it warily. Just until we reach the equipment room, Ethan promised. I'll let you out as soon as we're safe. With obvious reluctance, the hatchling climbed into the purifier. Ethan secured the access panel, leaving it slightly ajar to ensure adequate airflow, then slung the device over his shoulder as though it contained nothing more interesting than cleaning filters. Ready? He asked. The affirmative response came as a gentle warmth in his mind, accompanied by gratitude that made his throat tighten unexpectedly. Ethan's shift began as usual. He collected his hover mop and other supplies from the maintenance bay, nodding to the other cleaning staff as they dispersed to their assigned sectors. As head night janitor, he had the authority to inspect any area, which would provide their cover for approaching the Grand Hall during preparations. The station hummed with unusual activity. The diplomatic reception was a major event, bringing together representatives from all 7 major powers for preliminary discussions before tomorrow's formal negotiations. Security was heightened, with Nexus peacekeepers stationed at key junctions throughout the diplomatic sector. Ethan pushed his cleaning cart casually, the purifier nestled among bottles of sanitizer and stacks of cleaning cloths. He kept his eyes down, his posture unremarkable, just another invisible service worker going about his mundane duties. Evening, Cole, said one of the security officers as Ethan approached the diplomatic sector checkpoint. Her badge identified her as Natalie Quinn, one of the human peacekeepers assigned to the station. Evening, Officer Quinn, Ethan replied, stopping his cart. Just doing a final sanitization pass before the reception. Quinn glanced at his work order on her tablet. You're not on the pre-event cleaning roster. That's being handled by the day shift. Ethan felt sweat prickle along his spine, but kept his expression neutral. Special request from Ambassador Torvik. Apparently, one of the Solaran delegates has respiratory sensitivities to the standard cleaners. I'm applying the hypoallergenic formulation. Quinn frowned slightly, but Ethan had chosen his excuse well. The Solarans were known for their complex biological requirements, and Ambassador Torvik's attention to diplomatic niceties was legendary. After a moment, Quinn nodded. "All right, proceed. But stay clear of the Grand Hall itself. They're still setting up the security scanners." "Of course," Ethan agreed, resuming his progress with the cart. As he passed through the checkpoint, he felt the hatchling's anxiety spike, a sharp tang in the back of his mind. "Security scanners?" it questioned. "Standard procedure," Ethan subvocalized, barely moving his lips. "They're calibrated for weapons and explosives, not biological signatures. I think." The hatchling's uncertainty mirrored his own, but they were committed now. Ethan navigated through increasingly ornate corridors, the utilitarian design of the public areas giving way to the elegant aesthetics of the diplomatic sector. Here, the architecture incorporated elements from all 7 major civilizations, flowing Solaran curves alongside angular vexel crystalline structures, earthy Terran wood complementing the misty Novalian light sculptures. The Grand Hall stood at the heart of the diplomatic sector, a massive domed chamber capable of hosting hundreds of delegates in an atmosphere carefully balanced to accommodate diverse biological needs. Adjacent to it was their target, the environmental control room, which housed the systems that would power tonight's elaborate reception. Ethan paused at a junction, checking the time. The reception would begin in 1 hour. The technical staff would be making final adjustments to the environmental systems, then conduct a security sweep before admitting the guests. Their window of opportunity would be narrow, after the technicians left, but before security arrived. "We'll need to wait," Ethan murmured, steering his cart into an alcove where service robots were stored. He busied himself wiping down the inactive machines, maintaining his cover while monitoring the corridor. 20 minutes later, his patience was rewarded. A team of technicians emerged from the environmental control room, their conversation drifting down the corridor. "Final checks complete. We're at 120% capacity. Should be more than enough for those special effects the Solaran ambassador requested. Those light sculptures draw massive power. Hope the grid holds. That's why we rerouted through the auxiliary systems. Worst case, we dim the residential sectors for a few hours. No one will notice." Their voices faded as they turned a corner. Ethan waited another minute, then pushed his cart toward the control room door. His keycard would grant access. Maintenance had override privileges for all technical systems, but he hesitated with his hand over the scanner. "Once we're inside, how long will you need to send your signal?" he asked the hatchling. The response came as an impression rather than words. Approximately 5 minutes to tap into the power systems, another 3 to send the signal. 8 minutes total. 8 minutes during which power fluctuations might be detected, security alerted, their presence discovered. It wasn't much time, but it felt like an eternity. Ethan swiped his keycard. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room filled with humming equipment, atmospheric processors, holographic projectors, power distribution nodes, all tied into a central control console that glowed with status displays. Once inside, Ethan quickly locked the door and removed the hatchling from the purifier. It stretched gratefully, then scampered to the central console, examining the controls with surprising familiarity. "You understand this technology?" Ethan asked, surprised. The hatchling projected an image of adult stellar dragons interfacing with similar systems, not identical, but conceptually related. Stellar dragons, it seemed, had an innate understanding of energy patterns and flows, a necessity for their spacefaring existence. "What do you need me to do?" Ethan asked, acutely aware of the seconds ticking away. The hatchling directed him to a specific power distribution node, a crystalline structure pulsing with blue-white energy. It needed direct contact with the node while Ethan monitored the console, ensuring the power drain remained below detection thresholds. As the hatchling positioned itself beside the node, its scales began to glow more intensely, shifting from blue to a deep, vibrant purple. It placed one clawed foot against the crystal, and immediately the energy flow patterns on the console shifted, power redirecting in subtle but significant ways. Ethan watched the displays anxiously, ready to abort if the drainage approached dangerous levels. But the hatchling was surprisingly precise, drawing just enough power to charge itself without triggering alarms. After 4 minutes, the hatchling's entire body pulsed with stored energy, its scales now a brilliant violet that illuminated the entire room. It looked at Ethan, its opalescent eyes swirling with determination and gratitude. "Ready," it communicated. "We'll begin transmission." Ethan positioned himself at the door, peering through the small window to ensure the corridor remained empty. "Go ahead. I'll keep watch." The hatchling reared up on its hind legs, wings extending to their full span, still small, but now crackling with energy. It opened its mouth and emitted a sound unlike anything Ethan had ever heard, part musical tone, part electromagnetic pulse. The console displays flickered, and for a moment, Ethan feared they'd overloaded the systems. But the hatchling maintained control, modulating its signal with impressive precision. The transmission continued, a complex pattern of energy pulses that Ethan hoped would reach other stellar dragons somewhere in the vast darkness of space. He was so focused on monitoring the corridor that he almost missed the shift in the hatchling's signal, a sudden change from broadcasting to receiving. The hatchling's eyes widened, its body tensing as it processed incoming information. "What is it?" Ethan whispered urgently. The response came as a jumble of images, adult dragons approaching the station, but also danger, immediacy, warning. Something had changed. Their plan was compromised. Just then, a notification flashed on the console, "Security override in progress." Someone was remotely accessing the environmental systems. "We need to go," Ethan said, reopening the purifier. Now, the hatchling broke off its transmission, but instead of returning to the purifier, it projected a clear message. "Too late. Hunters detected signal. Coming now." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Here? To this room?" The confirmation came with a surge of fear that mirrored his own. The hunters had triangulated the signal, identified their location, and they were already on the station, the Vexel delegation. "Can you camouflage us both?" Ethan asked desperately. The hatchling conveyed uncertainty. It had never attempted to extend its light-bending abilities to another being, especially not one as large as a human. The effort might drain its remaining energy reserves, leaving it defenseless. Before they could decide, the door control panel flashed red. Someone was overriding the lock. Ethan looked around frantically for options. The ventilation system was too small for him. There were no other exits, nowhere to hide. "Trust me," the hatchling projected suddenly, leaping onto Ethan's shoulders and wrapping itself around his neck like a living collar. Before Ethan could respond, he felt a strange tingling sensation across his skin, and looking down, he saw his body begin to waver and distort, taking on the colors and patterns of the equipment behind him. The camouflage wasn't perfect. Up close, a careful observer would notice the distortion, but it was their only chance. Ethan pressed himself against the far wall, trying to remain perfectly still as the door slid open. 3 figures entered, tall, angular beings with crystalline extrusions protruding from their silvery exoskeletons. Vexel military elite, distinguished by the black insignias on their chest plates. They carried no visible weapons, but Ethan knew their exoskeletons contained integrated defense systems far more lethal than any handheld device. "Signal origin confirmed," said one in the clicking, resonant language of the Vexel, which Ethan understood thanks to his mandatory diplomatic language training. "Dragon hatchling, immature but viable. Scan for human biosignatures," ordered another. "The energy distribution log shows a maintenance keycard access 8 minutes ago." The third Vexel activated something in its exoskeleton, and a wave of energy pulsed through the room. Ethan felt the hatchling tense around his neck, its camouflage field fluctuating with the effort of maintaining their concealment against the scan. For a moment, it seemed to work. The scanning Vexel turned toward the console, apparently detecting nothing unusual. But then its head snapped back in their direction, compound eyes focusing with predatory intensity. There, against the wall, camouflage detected. The game was up. Ethan felt the hatchling's energy flagging, its camouflage field collapsing. In seconds, they would be visible and vulnerable. In that moment of crisis, Ethan made a decision. He had been running from connection, from responsibility, from matching to anyone or anything. But this small, brave being had trusted him, depended on him, and he would not let it down. As the camouflage failed completely, Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the hatchling and the Vexel hunters. "This creature is under my protection," he declared, drawing himself up to his full height. Unimpressive compared to the towering Vexel, but the best he could manage. By station law and interstellar treaty, stellar dragons are a protected species. Your actions constitute a violation of. "Silence, maintenance worker," interrupted the lead Vexel, its voice cold and dismissive. "This matter is beyond your comprehension. The hatchling possesses capabilities vital to Vexel security interests. You will surrender it immediately." "No," Ethan said simply. "I won't." The Vexel's compound eyes flickered, the equivalent of a surprised blink. Maintenance workers didn't refuse direct orders from diplomatic delegates, especially not Vexel military elites. "You misunderstand," the Vexel said, a dangerous edge entering its voice. "This is not a request. The dragon will come with us. You will be compensated for your cooperation and forget this encounter." Ethan felt the hatchling trembling against his neck, its fear palpable. But he also sensed something else, a growing presence at the edge of his awareness, a pressure building like an approaching storm. "I understand perfectly," Ethan replied, surprising himself with his steady voice. "And my answer remains no. The hatchling stays with me until its people arrive." The lead Vexel made a sharp gesture, and the other two moved to flank Ethan, their exoskeletons emitting a faint humming sound as weapon systems activated. "Its people will not be arriving," the leader stated. "Our vessels have established a perimeter around this station. Any approaching stellar dragons will be intercepted before they can interfere." Ethan's heart sank at this news, but he stood his ground. "Then we appear to be at an impasse. Because I'm not moving." The Vexel's patience ended. "Take the human into custody," it ordered its companions. "Minimal damage. We need no diplomatic incidents." The two Vexel warriors advanced, their crystalline appendages reconfiguring into restraint devices. Ethan tensed, knowing he stood no chance against them but determined to buy the hatchling whatever time he could. Just as the first Vexel reached for him, the entire room plunged into darkness. The power cut so completely that even the emergency lighting failed to activate. In the sudden blackness, Ethan felt the hatchling leap from his shoulders, its scales providing the only illumination, a soft, pulsing glow that cast eerie shadows across the Vexel's faceted features. The hunters froze, their compound eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. And in that moment of confusion, the hatchling acted. It wasn't large, wasn't physically powerful, but what it did next demonstrated why stellar dragons were revered throughout the galaxy. The hatchling's glow intensified, concentrating into a focused beam that struck the lead Vexel directly in its central eye cluster. But this was no mere light. It carried information, compressed and targeted with devastating precision. The Vexel staggered back, its exoskeleton emitting distressed clicking sounds as it processed whatever the hatchling had shown it. The other two warriors turned toward their leader in confusion, their own weapons momentarily forgotten. "Impossible," the lead Vexel clicked, its voice modulator distorting with shock. "Those futures cannot. We would never." The hatchling maintained the connection, its small body trembling with the effort, but its determination unwavering. Ethan realized what was happening. The hatchling was showing the Vexel probable futures, the consequences of their actions stretched across time. Whatever these futures contained, they were clearly devastating. The Vexel leader finally broke the connection, physically recoiling from the hatchling's beam. It turned to its companions, crystalline appendages quivering. "Abort mission," it ordered. "Priority override. Return to vessel immediately." But the hatchling, one protested. "Leave it." The leader's voice modulator cracked with strain. "The equations have changed. We must report to High Command. Without further explanation, the three Vexel retreated from the room, moving with the urgent precision of soldiers abandoning an untenable position. The door slid shut behind them, leaving Ethan and the hatchling alone in the darkness. "What did you show them?" Ethan asked, his voice hushed with awe. The hatchling, exhausted by its effort, projected not words but a simplified impression. It had revealed to the Vexel leader the probable outcome of their hunter program. Not just the immediate consequences, but the cascading effects across decades and centuries. The collapse of alliances, the erosion of trust, the eventual isolation and decline of the Vexel Confederacy. And something worse, a fundamental destabilization of cosmic equilibrium that would ultimately threaten all civilized species, including the Vexel themselves. But how? Ethan wondered. You said only mature dragons could see futures. The hatchling conveyed that it hadn't truly seen these futures itself. It had channeled possibilities intuited from its parents, combined with the raw power it had absorbed from the station's systems. A desperate gamble, but one that had worked. Just then, the lights flickered back on, systems rebooting throughout the room. The console displayed multiple alerts: power fluctuations, security breaches, incoming communications. Ethan moved to check the status, but before he could reach the console, a new alert flashed across the screen. "Attention, all personnel. Unidentified objects approaching station. Defensive protocols engaged." The hatchling perked up immediately, its exhaustion temporarily forgotten. It projected a clear, bright emotion: joy, recognition, family. "Your people?" Ethan asked. The affirmative response came with such happiness that Ethan couldn't help but smile, even as worry gnawed at him. If the station had engaged defensive protocols, the approaching stellar dragons might be met with hostile action rather than welcome. "We need to get to command," Ethan decided. "Explain the situation before there's a diplomatic disaster." The hatchling climbed back onto his shoulders, its weight comforting rather than burdensome now. Together, they left the environmental control room, abandoning Ethan's cleaning cart in favor of speed. The diplomatic sector was in controlled chaos, security personnel rushing to predetermined positions while dignitaries were escorted to secure areas. No one paid attention to a maintenance worker hurrying in the wrong direction, the invisibility of his position providing better cover than any camouflage. The command center was located at the station's hub, a secure facility that Ethan had cleaned but never entered while operational. As they approached, he saw the security had been doubled, for officers guarding the entrance instead of the usual two. "We'll never get past them," Ethan murmured. The hatchling stirred against his neck, then projected a surprising solution. It could attempt to communicate directly with the station's commander, bypassing the physical security entirely. Stellar dragons were telepathic not just with each other, but potentially with any receptive mind. The range was limited, the connection less reliable with non-dragons, but it might work if they could get close enough. Ethan nodded, positioning himself at a maintenance panel near the command center entrance, pretending to check systems while the hatchling concentrated. For several tense moments, nothing seemed to happen. Then one of the officers touched her earpiece, her expression changing from alert vigilance to confusion. "Commander Harrington wants to see a maintenance worker," she said to her colleague, clearly puzzled. "Says it's urgent." The other officer frowned. "That makes no sense." "Security protocols. Override code Theta 9 Epsilon," came a firm voice from within the command center. "Send him in. Now." The officers exchanged baffled looks, but stepped aside, gesturing for Ethan to enter. Heart pounding, he stepped through the doorway into the nerve center of Nexus Station. The command center was a circular chamber dominated by a holographic display of the station and surrounding space. Currently, the display showed the station at center, surrounded by a perimeter of security vessels, with several large, unidentified objects approaching from the outer system. Commander Avery Hart stood at the central console, a tall, imposing woman with close-cropped gray hair and the focused expression of someone accustomed to crisis management. Her gaze locked onto Ethan immediately, or rather, onto the hatchling draped across his shoulders. "Explain," she said simply, her voice carrying such natural authority that the dozen other officers in the room barely reacted to the unusual scene. Ethan took a deep breath and told their story, finding the hatchling, learning of the Vexel hunters, the confrontation in the environmental control room. He spoke quickly but clearly, aware that every second mattered with defensive systems engaged. Commander Hart listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Ethan finished, she turned to her tactical officer. "Stand down defensive systems," she ordered. "Open a channel to the approaching objects." "Ma'am?" the officer questioned, clearly surprised. "Protocol dictates." "I'm well aware of protocol, Lieutenant," Hart said crisply. "But I'm not about to fire on stellar dragons attempting to recover a lost child." "Open the channel." The tactical officer complied, adjusting controls on his console. "Channel open, Commander." Hart straightened, addressing the void directly. "This is Commander Avery Hart of Nexus Station to approaching stellar dragons. We have your hatchlings safe aboard this station. Please respond with your intentions." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to everyone's astonishment, a voice filled the command center, not through the communication systems, but directly in their minds, a harmonious chorus of thought that somehow managed to convey the impression of ancient wisdom and profound relief simultaneously. "Nexus Station, we receive you. Our gratitude for sheltering our child is beyond measure. We request permission to approach and retrieve our offspring." Hart, to her credit, recovered quickly from the surprise of telepathic communication. "Permission granted. We'll provide coordinates for a safe approach vector." As the tactical officer transmitted the coordinates, the hatchling on Ethan's shoulders vibrated with excitement, projecting such intense joy that several officers smiled involuntarily, catching the emotional overflow. "What about the Vexel delegation?" Ethan asked quietly. "They were hunting stellar dragons. There should be consequences." Hart's expression hardened. "There will be. I've already ordered their vessels contained, pending investigation. If what you've told me is confirmed, they violated multiple provisions of the Interstellar Accords." The hatchling chirped, drawing their attention, and projected an alternative suggestion, not punishment for the Vexel, but understanding. It shared with them all the same vision it had shown the hunters, the disastrous futures that awaited if conflict escalated, but also branching possibilities where cooperation led to mutual benefit. Commander Hart considered this perspective thoughtfully. "Wisdom from the young," she murmured. "Perhaps there's a diplomatic solution that serves justice without provoking further conflict." The holographic display updated, showing the approaching stellar dragons adjusting course to follow the provided vector. There were 5 of them, each many times larger than the hatchling, their bodies shimmering with colors that the station's sensors struggled to properly render. "They'll arrive in approximately 20 minutes, the tactical officer reported. "Shall I arrange a reception party in Docking Bay 3? Hart nodded. "Yes. Minimal personnel, no weapons." She looked at Ethan. "You'll accompany us, of course. You've earned that right." Ethan felt a complex mix of emotions, pride at the recognition, joy for the hatchling's imminent reunion, but also a surprising sense of loss. His solitary routine would resume once the hatchling departed. The adventure would end, and he would be alone again. The hatchling, sensing his thoughts, nudged his cheek gently with its snout. Not end. It projected. Beginning. Before Ethan could ask what it meant, alarms blared throughout the command center. The tactical display flashed red as new objects appeared at the edge of sensor range, sleek, black vessels matching the description of the hunter's ships. "Vexel warships," the tactical officer announced tensely. 7 vessels, heavy armament, approaching at attack velocity. Hart's expression darkened. "Hail them." "No response, Commander. Their weapons systems are active. Raise shields. Alert our security vessels to intercept." The situation was deteriorating rapidly toward the very conflict the hatchling had warned against. Ethan felt helpless, a maintenance worker amid a potential interstellar battle. But the hatchling on his shoulders suddenly straightened, its scales shifting to a deep, intense gold. "Wait," it projected, the thought so powerful that everyone in the command center heard it. Watch. On the display, the 5 approaching stellar dragons changed course abruptly, accelerating toward the incoming Vexel vessels. The dragons' bodies began to glow with increasing intensity, forming a perfect pentagonal formation as they moved. "What are they doing?" Hart asked, fascinated despite the crisis. The hatchling projected understanding. Its parents and their companions were not attacking, but communicating. They were showing the Vexel fleet the same futures, the same possibilities, the same choices that the hatchling had revealed to the hunters. The command center fell silent, all eyes fixed on the tactical display as the dragons intercepted the Vexel fleet. For several tense moments, it seemed that conflict was inevitable. Then, amazingly, the Vexel vessels powered down their weapons systems and adjusted course, falling into a non-aggressive formation. "They're standing down," the tactical officer reported, disbelief evident in his voice. Hart released a breath she'd been holding. Sometimes, seeing the consequences of your actions is the most powerful deterrent. The crisis averted, preparations resumed for receiving the stellar dragons. Ethan carried the hatchling to Docking Bay 3, where a small reception committee awaited the arrival of beings rarely seen at diplomatic stations. As they waited, the hatchling shared with Ethan a series of images, star systems he'd never seen, nebulae of breathtaking beauty, the sensation of soaring through the void propelled by nothing but one's own bioelectric field. It was showing him its home, its life, its future. And then, surprisingly, it showed him something else, himself, aboard a vessel unlike any human craft, traveling alongside stellar dragons as they navigated the cosmos. An invitation. "You want me to come with you?" Ethan asked, astonished. The affirmative response came with qualifications, not permanently, but as a bridge between species. The stellar dragons had long observed humanity from afar, recognizing potential but hesitant to engage directly. Ethan's protection of the hatchling had demonstrated qualities they valued: courage, compassion, integrity. They offered him a role as liaison, the first human to truly know their kind. Before Ethan could respond, the massive bay doors began to cycle open. Through the atmospheric containment field came the adult stellar dragons, their true appearance even more magnificent than the tactical display had suggested. They were vast, sinuous beings with scales that captured and reflected starlight in ways that seemed to bend reality around them. Their wings spread wide, not for flight in atmosphere, but as solar sails and sensor arrays, collecting energy and information simultaneously. The hatchling leapt from Ethan's shoulders, scampering across the deck to meet its family. The reunion was both physical and telepathic, a touching of snouts and a sharing of experiences so intense that even the human observers felt echoes of the joy and relief exchanged. Then, to Ethan's surprise, the largest dragon, clearly the hatchling's parent, approached him directly. It lowered its massive head until its opalescent eyes were level with his, and Ethan felt himself drawn into a consciousness vast and ancient, yet warmly familiar thanks to his connection with the hatchling. "Ethan Cole," came the thought voice, deeper and more complex than the hatchling's simple projections. "You protected our child when you had no obligation to do so. You risked yourself for a being not of your kind. Such actions define the best of what any sentient species can aspire to be." Ethan felt himself blushing under the praise. "Anyone would have done the same," he mumbled. The dragon's amusement rippled through his mind. "We both know that is not true. Choices reveal character, and your choices revealed much." The dragon raised its head, addressing Commander Hart and the assembled officers as well. "Today marks a turning point in relations between our kinds. The courage of one human has opened a door long closed. We offer formal alliance with your species, beginning with this station as our point of contact." Hart stepped forward, her usual composure momentarily shaken by the historical significance of the moment. "On behalf of Nexus Station and the united species we represent, we accept your offer with gratitude and hope for a prosperous shared future." The diplomatic niceties concluded, The dragon returned its attention to Ethan. Our child has shared its proposal with you. We extend the same invitation formally. Will you journey with us, Ethan Cole? Will you be the first human to learn our ways, to see our worlds, to help us understand your kind as we wish to be understood? Ethan looked around at the sterile docking bay, thought of his small quarters, his solitary routine, the years of hiding from connection. Then he looked at the hatchling, now playing exuberantly with what appeared to be its siblings, its joy uncontained. Yes, he said simply. I would be honored. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood in his quarters for the last time, a small bag containing his few personal possessions slung over his shoulder. The photos of Earth were carefully packed, but he'd left the star chart on the wall. He wouldn't need it where he was going. A soft chirp from the corridor reminded him it was time to leave. The hatchling, which he now knew was called something approximating Seeker of New Paths in its own language, waited impatiently, eager to begin their journey. Nexus Station had been transformed in the days following the Stellar Dragon's arrival. The Vexel delegation had withdrawn in diplomatic disgrace, but negotiations were already underway for reconciliation. The Dragon's intervention had revealed not just the military hunters' actions, but a deeper political struggle within the Vexel Confederacy, between those who sought power through dominance and those who understood the value of cooperation. Commander Hart had personally overseen the creation of a new position for Ethan's replacement, Interspecies Liaison Officer, with quarters adjacent to a specially designed habitat for visiting stellar dragons. The dragons had promised regular contact with the station, a dramatic shift from their previous isolation. As Ethan made his way to the departure bay, he passed through corridors that seemed somehow brighter than before. Station personnel nodded respectfully, a far cry from his previous invisibility. News of his appointment as the first human ambassador to the Stellar Dragons had spread throughout the station, transforming the solitary janitor into something of a celebrity. In the docking bay, the dragons waited, 5 adults and 3 hatchlings, including his friend. They would travel not in a conventional vessel, but through space itself, the adults generating a protective field that would sustain Ethan during the journey. Having second thoughts? Asked Commander Hart, who had come to see him off. Ethan smiled, watching the hatchling race around the legs of its elders. Not one. You've opened a door we didn't even know existed, Hart said, extending her hand. Good luck out there, Ambassador Cole. Ethan shook her hand, still uncomfortable with his new title, but grateful for the opportunity it represented. I'm just a janitor who made a friend, Commander. The rest is just details. The best diplomats are those who know how to clean up messes, Hart replied with a rare smile. You'll do fine. With final farewells complete, Ethan joined the dragons. The hatchling immediately climbed to its familiar position on his shoulders, its weight now a comfort rather than a burden. Together, they moved through the atmospheric containment field into the vastness of space. The sensation was unlike anything Ethan had experienced. Not cold or airless as he had feared, but warm and embracing, as though he floated in a perfectly temperate sea. The dragons surrounded him, their massive bodies creating a bubble of safety as they accelerated away from the station. The hatchling projected excitement, showing him images of the places they would visit, the wonders he would see. Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, pure, uncomplicated happiness. As Nexus Station dwindled behind them, Ethan reflected on how completely his life had changed in the span of just a few days, all because he'd answered a simple question from a lost child seeking shelter. Can I sleep here tonight? The hatchling had asked. And his answer had opened the universe. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.